Hello and welcome. This is the Fit for Privacy podcast, the podcast for privacy professionals. I'm your host Punit Bhatia, and in this podcast, we talk to privacy influencers so that you learn and get the best out of their experiences and thoughts. So let's get started. Remember, this is not professional advice, and if you need advice, please go and talk to a professional. Hello and welcome. Today we have a very special guest. We have Eline Chivot, who's a Senior Policy Analyst from Center for Data Innovation. Welcome, Eline.
Thank you, Punit, for having me. It's great to be here.
Thanks for being here. And in this show, we help our customers or our audiences with tips and tricks for data privacy. And you have a strong background in that, so I'm sure they will be keen to listen to you. So let's start. Maybe if you can introduce yourself and also talk about what's your role and how Center for Data Innovation plays a part in data privacy.
Yeah, so my name is Eline Chivot. I work at the Center for Data Innovation, indeed, as a Senior Policy Analyst. And here I cover policies that have to do with digital at EU level. So whatever kind of legislations or rules are being discussed or enacted, I try to sort of help the debate or inform policymakers and other stakeholders about what's going on and what we think is important and they should touch upon. So that I do through events, organizing events, public panels, roundtables with different stakeholders of the community. I also publish op-eds and reports. We've published one on, for instance, the global AI race. It's one of the issues that I cover, artificial intelligence. And I also just interact continuously with the community on a regular basis. It's something very important here. So yeah,
That's interesting. How do you manage to do all that together by yourself?
No, it's actually very much because of the community.
Nice.
It's a group of people that genuinely want to help each other. You never know, you might end up working with each other at some point because a lot of people change positions every couple of years. So this is a genuine interaction. For instance, you say, hey, I'm interested in what you do. I'd like to talk to you. Let's have coffee. Yeah, sure, let's do that.
Okay.
A lot of people work in the same area, the European district where I work. So this is really helpful to build a strong network of that's how I think that's how I manage.
Great. So we normally start with a quick questions that you can answer rapidly, and then it allows us to have a better rapport, better understanding, and audience can also get to understand you. So if I may, tell me one thing that you hate about privacy.
So hate is a bit of a strong word, of course, but what I dislike is it's often presented and portrayed by policymakers in particular and other stakeholders as something negative or something, to put it in differently, if we explore data-driven innovation, that might come at a cost, which is sacrificing privacy. And I think protecting privacy and enabling innovation and developing technologies are not mutually exclusive objectives. And lately we've been regulating technology with the hope that it will generate more privacy, but it doesn't necessarily do that. And another thing about privacy is I think it's a very, it's an evolving concept, of course, but it evolves less rapidly than technology. And it's a subjective concept, very, culturally, depending on the country, you don't have the same definition of privacy. And what it means in the analog world doesn't mean the same online.
Sure.
And there are different ways in which you can define privacy offline and online.
Great. Normally they say that the technology leads and the laws lag.
That's something you often hear. That's true.
Yeah. Because technology goes rapidly, and then laws are trying to catch up with what technology is doing and control, manage, or make sure that it's ethical.
Yes, and also, for instance, a very good example of that is the GDPR, which was adopted in 2018 in the EU. It's the EU's privacy law. And that law, when it was drafted and prepared, everybody had big data in mind, but not necessarily AI.
Right.
The big conversation about AI came back up, a couple of years after. And there are many things that I see in my work that suggest that the law is adapted to various technologies and processes, but one of them definitely isn't adapted to is AI and algorithmic decision making, and it does impact it.
Right. And if you had yourself in front of you, what would you tell yourself?
So the issues and topics I touch upon in my work, it's in my work, but it's also something that affects me or that I can relate to as a user of technologies and applications. So I'm no stranger to the discussion that's happening, the tech clash, the negativity, the risks that are raised, the concerns about data collection. And sometimes I wonder, okay, it's not what I truly believe, but when I really believe in an argument that I defend at work, and then I have a conversation about the same topic with friends and family, well, you sort of round your angles, and I want to know, what do I really stand for? Is it okay to constantly question everything?
Right.
Or should I have strong opinions at work similar to those I have in my private life?
Yeah, and it's not easy sometimes in work because you're not the only one having a strong opinion, the others also have, and while at home it's still easier because if you're the strong opinion, you have a different kind of leverage.
Yeah, and a different kind of attitude as well.
Indeed. And if you have to choose between time, money, fitness, what do you choose? Because in our lives, it's always very busy, and we're always struggling to balance time, money, and also some of the fitness aspects, and sometimes we let that go. But what do you normally choose?
Well, what I value, and I should choose more often, is time. I think time, because it's invaluable, you can't buy it.
No.
But if you have time and you make time, then you can find ways to make money if that's an objective.
Right.
You can find ways to exercise more if you want to stay fit.
Absolutely.
You can buy your own food, make your own meals, so you actually find a way to get healthier. So there are many things that you can do because of time, thanks to time, to having time.
Very well said. The famous motivational speaker Jim Rohn often says, you cannot buy time, as you say, but you can earn money. So if you have to choose, you should always choose time. If you have time, you make money, you can do anything.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, and it's the time which is the most important thing. So you're
for you
spot
as well.
on. Yeah, for me, for certainly. How do I make best use of the time that I have available? And also I have multiple priorities, sometimes conflicting priorities. What do I do? What I do not do? What do I do now? And that's always a challenge. But it's Jim Rohn's quote which helped me. But if I had met you before, heard you before in the interview, I would have known.
It's today, thanks.
Yes, and now GDPR is quite complex. It's 270 plus pages of legislation, lots of requirements. If one word that comes to your mind with GDPR, just one word, what would that be?
Actually, you sort of named it in your question. It's complexity. I think it added complexity for organizations. They have to spend an incredibly huge amount of time and resources to comply with it. And it has also somehow made the environment online for users a bit more complex too, and difficult to navigate. So I think that could be the right word.
Complexity, that's interesting. And you mentioned already that sometimes you take the conversations from office to home. And when you take privacy conversations home with family, with friends, with relatives, how does it go? Do they appreciate the fact that privacy is important, or it's just your job?
That's interesting, because when we mentioned data collection and the controversies around it, when I mentioned it to my family, they don't necessarily choose to change their attitudes and protect their privacy more, knowing everything that could happen. For instance, they use the same passwords for accessing different services online. So I think they are aware of the discussions and the risks and concerns. But they just continue to do their thing. I think the way in which we talk about privacy and GDPR and data collection and all of that in my world, in my community at work, it's very much remote and detached from what other people talk about and care about in other communities.
Absolutely, and I think for normal people who are not into, for us, privacy is a profession, or data, AI, all these things are profession. But for the others, privacy is just another thing.
Yeah, and as mentioned, it also depends. Not everyone is looking after privacy the same way. And,
right.
Yeah.
And some just give up saying, I will be tracked,
Oh, yeah.
I know, and it's too late for me to control my
Exactly.
privacy. It was 20 years ago, 10
Yeah.
years ago when internet started.
Yeah.
Then I should have started more appropriately.
Absolutely, yeah.
Good. So let me ask you a few questions about compliance and also a little bit more in depth. So you mentioned AI, and we always talk about GDPR, and we know AI is far ahead, and GDPR does not have enough controls in place. But some people also say that it's a framework to drive privacy. And if you look at it that, then it can certainly provide a framework for AI, robotics, innovation, whatever you want to do. But what's your view, and what do you see when you talk to the policymakers about this AI, robotics, innovation, or whatever partnerships? The new things that we see, a new world that we will be in coming, say, decades, let's say. I mean, they are already there, but the proliferation of these technologies will be much, much, much more. So how do you balance out, or what's your view based on your interactions?
So there are two types of stakeholders you can talk to, let's say, and they will have two different stories to tell you. Well, just to exaggerate a little bit the trade, policymakers would say the GDPR, at least in the EU, would be a golden standard, and that it's quite successful. It's been quite successful as being there for future technologies as well, including AI, robotics. And industry would tell you a different story. Not all of them may come forth with that, but it has had an impact in the development of AI systems.
Yeah.
I think I briefly hinted at that earlier, is that you have some requirements like data minimization and transparency and explainability, which are basically a tall order when it comes to AI systems. So a lot of companies find it difficult to comply with it and to navigate the complexity of it all, of the requirements.
But then that's very similar to what they ask about GDPR even for normal privacy requirements. Because somehow organizations tend to look for right or wrong, black and white answers. While GDPR is more open, more framework oriented, saying do this, do that, be transparent, be accountable. And now for people to define what is transparency, what is accountability, it has boundaries, it has different opinions.
Yeah, exactly. That's another issue that I see, actually, if I may, is that you have different jurisdictions, different regulators across the EU who have a different understanding of the law, let alone different levels in terms of resources, and the cooperation is maybe missing at some point. But it's the diverging interpretations of a law lead to more legal uncertainty for companies. So
even in the same jurisdiction, I think the younger generation and the older generation have a different view, different interpretation. The younger generation is much more open, much more liberal, while the older generation is trying to feel it.
Yeah, that's true.
Of course, it can't be generalized. There are even variants in each generation as well. And it's natural to have across countries, across jurisdiction, different interpretation because of culture, socioeconomic factors, and many other things.
Oh yeah, and also fundamental rights. I mean, we have a common charter, but for instance, abortion is penalized or prohibited actually in Poland, but may not be in other countries. Same between the EU and the US. We may be close in many respects, but freedom of speech is seen as a different thing there and here. So
yeah, that's absolutely true. And one of the things when GDPR was coming along, or at least the media hype that was, that there will be huge fines, the 20 million and the 4% and so on. But if we look at, except for Google and a couple of other fines, but they're pretty, not so high, not in the region of 4% of global turnover.
Right. So this is the highest threshold, right?
Right.
Luckily, not a lot of businesses are going to get hit that hard, of course. I think there has been enforcement, actually. There have been fines, maybe not headline-grabbing fines as the Google one from last year, which was 50 million euros, but there has been a few. So businesses have been impacted in Europe. Now, what people want to see is not blood, but let's say for the GDPR to show its teeth through higher fines targeted especially at US giants. So they see that as the remedy. The success of the GDPR would be measured through fines. And I think this is the wrong way to try to make a point and to make examples that the law is working. I think there are other parameters, like the awareness of the law, for example, and the change in mindsets potentially. But it's true that, the GDPR, apparently the general public and policymakers expect that it would lead to more fines.
Yeah, but I think it's more with general public or media who expect more fines. The policymakers or the privacy professional, they do understand that that's the higher limit. We won't get there. But what it has achieved, GDPR, is put the privacy discussion on each and every boardroom. That's the biggest achievement.
Well, that's one way to see it. One thing that can explain that these investigations haven't been wrapped up at EU level is because you have two main countries that deal with most of those biggest cases, which is Luxembourg and Ireland. And this lack of resources that I mentioned, that can explain the slow progress.
Right. But do you think small businesses would survive these big fines? Because we do understand it's meant for the US businesses or the online businesses or the big giants. So the numbers, the upward numbers, 20 million, 4%, are in that context. But sometimes small businesses think, I have a business of 1 million and I can be fined up to 20 million. What will happen?
Right, so of course there are going to be cases that will be a disaster potentially for small and medium enterprises. In Europe, I do believe we want to protect them because they represent a significant part of the job market. They hire a lot of people. But yeah, I do think the key of the issue, that the crux of the matter really that you're pointing to, is more how much money already has been spent on compliance and what is the result. So the money spent on compliance, you see SMEs spending resources on GDPR insurance, and instead of hiring engineers, they're hiring privacy lawyers. Instead of investing in R&D, they're spending their resources differently because they're afraid of sanctions potentially. Right. And then the result of that is, in the end, if you look at some surveys, the figures are quite concerning. There are many businesses that still are not compliant.
Right.
I can name just one by Capgemini from a few months ago that suggests 28% of the companies they surveyed across all member states, only 28% of them declare being fully compliant to the GDPR.
Right. And then there's also the argument of, can you be fully compliant?
Can you?
It's a difficult thing. Nobody can come in and certify you that you are fully compliant. There's no risk of fine. There's no such thing like that. So you have to do your best, but you're right. It's only 20%, 28% who are able to say, yes, we've done what we wanted to do.
I think so.
Yeah.
If you talk to developers as well, let's say I've actually talked to one of them, and there's in a GDPR a way in which you can anonymize data, and that data scientists were telling me, we sat down together, we tried to find a way to make sure we were compliant with GDPR by anonymizing data. Sorry, should I read?
It's a tongue twister, no problem. It happens.
Yeah, it's a tough word. And she said, well, we were still not sure.
Yeah.
And these are not ideological people; they are developers. They just say, it's just not that easy.
True, and I think apart from anonymization or pseudo-anonymization, there's another challenge around deletion of data or right to be forgotten. Because traditionally the systems were built to accumulate data.
Right.
And now we are talking about deletion of data, so having data having an expiry date, kind of. But the systems have not been built up, so maybe in future systems we may have that functionality, but the past system we have to find workarounds, and it's a huge cost for some of the companies.
I think it's a great suggestion you're making, but to be able to develop those alternative systems, you need funding, you need money, and we're missing investments in Europe. So
yeah, and it's also to balance out with innovation, because if you look at the States, they're always ahead in innovation, and now some people fear with GDPR and other laws, innovation would a little bit be restricted or slowed down.
Yeah, that's right. That's great.
Yeah. Okay. Moving on, I'm always believing that we can talk about the policy, the procedure, the law, the systems, the technology, and all those things. But end of the day, it's the human factor. We the people, or rather, we are the professionals, but there are people, other people, who are going to be determining the success of any initiative, be it privacy, be it AI, be it robotics, or anything else. So let me ask you some questions. So do you read actually the privacy statements and cookie statements? Because when I go to internet, it's not possible to go to any website before clicking accept. And if I start reading it, given the time pressures and every time, of course I'm sensitive of, I do read a little bit, but it's not possible to read word per word. What do you do?
So what I've done is, I hope best practice to a certain extent, is that I've read a few, of course, especially those websites that I've used the most, just to make sure I understand what it's all about, of course. So it's part of my work. For my work, I've done that. But I don't do it systematically anymore, of course. So I just click through because I want to read that article on my phone and I'm walking in the street. And so I'm like 13% of Europeans only read fully the terms and conditions. Yeah. I'm not part of the 13%. It's from the Eurobarometer from the Commission from last year. And I think about 47% read them partially. Yeah. And maybe there are a lot of liars in there. But in any case, a lot of those privacy notices also are, not necessarily meaningful. There's been a study by a US and German university showing that many of them are actually manipulative a little bit. You try to nudge the person to say yes anyway.
Absolutely.
So there's a lot of, it's not real control that you have anyway.
Well, we are in the good part, 47% partially reading it.
Right, I suppose we are.
Yeah, and I think those who say 13% we read everything, I don't know if they have any other things to do, because we have time pressure. You go into a website, okay, I'm subscribing to a new website, new service, I would pay attention to certain clauses, but if I'm checking news, I would rather accept and then clear out my cookies if I was like really scared of something, some strange activity. But good to know. And so now we have the time pressure, we have these complexity of law, and we also have the evolution of technology. And in between all that, we need to stay up to date. Because as privacy professionals, as data professionals, as innovation professionals, whatever we like to call ourselves, or the modern day professionals, let's put it like that, you need to stay in touch with latest information. How do you do that?
Well, I would love to know how you do that as well. But first I would answer, well, I mentioned the network, the community that I work with. That's very helpful to, again, help each other by sharing information. It's true that it's a very rapidly evolving world, but I've subscribed to a number of newsletters. I know a lot of people are subscribed and they don't read them. I make sure I read every single one of them every day. And I have maybe 40 coming through, but I've chosen them and they're very, very helpful. And then sometimes I make a little bit more time to go through a couple of articles that I think are directly related to my priorities. So this is how I would say I manage. I listen to podcasts as well when I go for a run. So it's sort of as if I'm using my free time as well to educate myself. But if you truly like what you do and love what you do, then it's not really work, is it?
So we'll see if you hear this one out.
That's right.
On my part, it's challenging, let's be very honest about it. But I do it in layers. So I set aside a time, at least 15 minutes or maximum 30 minutes every day. And twice a week I have 2 hours, but they get squeezed. But I keep 2 hours of blocked. And then I'm doing it in multiple layers. One, I like to talk to a lot of people because I'm a more interactive person. So I talk to people and get information from my customers and see how they are doing, what they are doing, and learn from that. And then when they tell me that's a new guidance and I go and read it, that's the first thing. Second, I have subscriptions, but I don't have 40, I have maybe about 7 or 8. And then I have a couple of subscriptions which aggregate all the news on privacy and give me.
Oh yes, those platforms, they're very useful. Yeah.
Right, so I have a couple of those platforms. And then I listen to podcasts, I listen to YouTube or other information and other people. And then I also go to social media groups, LinkedIn and Facebook. Because that gives me indication or ideas around what does the market need. Like this podcast came through that kind of a concept. I searched through and I was looking for some very nice podcasts. There are some very good ones, but there's space for a few more.
Yeah, I think that's very good analysis in terms of the process that you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, you try to do everything and hope that you don't miss. But it's so much of information these days, you will certainly miss.
Yeah. That's something we have to accept. I think that's actually the hard part of it.
Right. So it's pick and choose. Exactly. Because I'm also interested in AI, I'm also interested in innovation, I'm also interested in data retention, security, cyber security, but you can't do all.
No.
So I don't have much newsletters on everything, but privacy I have, and rest I keep an eye on. But I think it's the same as you say, keep eyes open and keep eyes and ears open.
And stay curious.
Yeah, stay curious. That's the right word. And also with our, as a professional, we talked about the time, money and fitness aspect, but there's also managing priorities because there's so many demands, so many challenges. of course, there's the
Yeah.
demand and staying up to date, but even in the job, there are so many demands. So how do you prioritize?
I am trying to get better at balance because for me, everything can be a priority. Let's say there's a student that sends me an email, he or she wants help. It's not a priority, supposedly, but I really want to help him or her. So I'm going to make time no matter what. And maybe I will wait 48 hours, but I will get that done as soon as possible. But the result of that is that you get stretched days.
Right.
So I guess I look at what's really time sensitive, what's in terms of the hot topics, what's really on my plate. And then really, I don't think I'm a good example at trying to maintain a balance of that. I try to do as much as I can all the time.
Okay.
What about you?
For me, it's challenging, but I'm not normally a balanced person. So it was very difficult for me when I get out of balance.
Okay.
So, and that was the hard part. But then I read a book, I'm struggling to find the name, but it said, accept to be out of balance and acknowledge it. So for that, when I'm like into the things and I'm struggling, then I know, okay, I'm struggling. So that's a very good indication that I'm out of balance.
Exactly.
Then I accept it and I say, what am I struggling with? Okay, this week it's a tough week, I'm traveling, so I won't do fitness.
Right.
So I know fitness is out of balance and professional things are going to take supersede others. So I then accept it. So then I have given shifted my values, or same way for family or other things.
Yeah.
So that book talked about let the priorities or the values change, but accept it. My value 3 is superseding the value 1, but it's for a reason, because there's a deadline and I will give more time to work.
Yeah.
And then come back to family, or explain at that time, I would come back on Sunday and I'll spend time with you, and then give them a couple of hours and rebalance. So you put it in out of balance and then try to balance it out. I don't know that's perfect, but that's somehow seems to work for me now.
No, it does sound very efficient and inspiring too. And I think there's a bit of a pressure to make sure we have work-life balance. And what does that mean?
Right.
I mean, whose decision is that? It should be ours as individuals.
Indeed, and especially since being an entrepreneur, I've realized work-life balance for entrepreneurs is very, very, very challenging. And sometimes then you get overwhelmed, you know you are out of balance, but then you don't know how to come in balance. So then I do a long walk.
Ah, yeah, that's good.
Reflect, think, and sometimes you come back, or sometimes then I call a friend and say, I'm out of balance.
Oh, there. Sounds
okay, so I think very interesting chat, but in essence of time, there's always an end for conversations like this. But unfortunately, it would be really nice to continue the conversation. But what would be your one single message that you would like to pass people so that the audiences feel inspired or can take it away?
Well, one thing that I've observed is the more you are yourself, and the more you listen to your intuitions, the less you're wrong about things. I noticed, for instance, in my community, a lot of women feel they're undervalued or not appreciated enough. I didn't encounter it so much because I've been lucky, probably, but also because I've just been, I'm out there. I'm not with the guys or against the guys. I'm just doing what I do. I try to do the best I can, and also always try to follow and get things done. And for instance, trying to get a high-level policymaker to speak. I always think, I have no chance to get him or her to speak at my event, but I'm still going to try. And then if I don't get a response, I call. So I think because that's what you just do. You should just try to believe and to do what you want to get.
So be yourself, keep trying.
Yes.
And let things happen.
Exactly. They will.
Good. That's a very good philosophy to have.
Thank you, Punit.
Okay. Thanks, Eline, for being here. It was a pleasure to have you on the show.
Mine.
And wish you all the best with your initiative and your life.
Likewise. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. So this was Eline Chivot, the Senior Policy Analyst from Center for Data Innovation. And I look forward to see you next time. Thank you. Have a good day and stay blessed. So this was Fit for Privacy podcast. Thanks for tuning in. If you have any suggestions, ideas, or names of people who can be guests here, or you want to have your question answered, please email me info@punitbhatia.com. You can also leave a comment here. You can also follow me at my Facebook page, YouTube channel, or LinkedIn. Thank you once more and look forward to seeing you back next time.